For White Star Line, the loss of the Titanic wasn't their first brush with disaster. Another vessel decades before would meet a similar fate, causing hundreds to lose their lives on the treacherous doorstep to Halifax Harbor. On this episode of Never Stop Learning, we will be taking a look at the sinking of the SS Atlantic. In 1870, at the Harland and Wolff shipyard, the order came in for a new fleet of steamships called the Oceanic class. The second of these ships, the Atlantic, was to be one of the largest and most luxurious vessels the world had ever seen. At a length of 421 feet, she could reach a top speed of almost 15 knots with her single propeller. The ship had 4 decks and could accommodate 1,166 passengers as well as her crew. She also had 2 square rig sails on each side of her funnel in case the ship's coal supply ran low. The Oceanic class of ships were designed for style over speed, with the focus on enjoying the experience of the voyage. Life aboard the ship was divided between 2 classes. The saloon class, which boasted a large dining saloon, as well as luxurious cabins and public washrooms equipped with heated running water. Back in 1870, this was considered a luxury. Steerage class was located below deck and was divided into 3 sections. Single men were housed near the bow of the ship, while single women and children were in the stern. Families were housed in the middle to keep the single men from harassing the women and children. All parts of the ship were lit by gas lights, since electricity on ships was still in its infancy, and after 11 p.m., it was lights out in sleeping areas. SS Atlantic was launched on November 26, 1870, and was ready for her maiden voyage from Liverpool to New York on June 8th the following year. She was marketed as being safe, comfortable, and the ideal way to travel. Captained by James Williams, the ship performed beautifully until on March 20th, 1873, the Atlantic departed Liverpool with 835 passengers, as well as her crew of 85, bound for New York. After a quick stop in Queenstown, Ireland to pick up some Irish immigrants, she began her journey across the ocean which shares her name. For the first few days, the ship found herself traveling calm seas and was making great time. For the passengers aboard, it seemed like the perfect start for an adventure to the New World. However, by March 23rd, the ship ran into rough seas and was slowed by an exceptionally strong headwind. The rough seas caused many aboard to become seasick, leading many nauseated passengers to lose their lunches, filling the ship with the stench of vomit and sickness. Cabin biscuits were served to all passengers in hopes to relieve some of the motion sickness. The Atlantic pushed on against the rough weather, but progress was slow, and by the 7th day, Captain Williams was beginning to worry they were burning through coal too quickly. Williams asked the chief engineer, John Foxley, to give him an update on how much coal remained in the reserves. Back in the 1870s, it was common for engineers to overestimate usage and underestimate supplies in order to keep the captain cautious about consumption and to anticipate any issues that may present themselves. Based on his previous report, Foxley estimated that the ship would run out of coal before reaching her destination. This was not entirely true, but merely an exaggeration, as the chief engineer didn't want his ship to end up stranded in the Atlantic with no fuel, should the situation get any worse. Foxley reported to Captain Williams that they had 127 tons of coal left, even though in reality it was closer to 160. The captain now found himself in a tough spot. At their current position under optimal conditions, the ship would need roughly 130 tons of coal to reach New York. should he attempt to make it and risk running out of coal, leaving him and almost 1,000 people in his care adrift on the Atlantic? Or does he take the safe bet and resupply in Halifax, Nova Scotia, before continuing to New York? In the end, he decided that the safety of his crew and passengers were of utmost importance and plotted a course for Halifax. The waters surrounding Halifax Harbor are littered with rocky shallows, strong currents, and other hazards that can quickly spell the end to any ship unaware of the dangers. Back then, the best way to enter the harbor was either by tugboat or to use the Sambro Island Lighthouse as a guide. This beacon was the best way for ships' captains to know where their vessels were in relation to the harbor entrance. Aboard the Atlantic, most officers had never been to Halifax before and had no idea of the dangers that lay ahead of them. At midnight on April 1st, 1873, Second Officer Henry Metcalf and Fourth Officer John Brown arrived at the helm to begin their watch. Not long after, Captain Williams appeared on the bridge and calculated that the lighthouse should be visible on the ship's port side by 3 a.m. He ordered Metcalf and Brown to stop the ship as soon as the lighthouse was visible, so that they could wait until morning to attempt to navigate the dangerous waters. Sadly, Williams' calculations were incorrect, as strong currents had pulled the ship further west, leaving the lighthouse to actually be found on the starboard side of the ship. With 3 hours before the lighthouse would be coming into view, the captain told Metcalf that he would be in the chart room getting some rest and ordered the second officer to wake him if he saw the lighthouse or if the clock struck 3 a.m., whichever came first. The captain also ordered the steward to wake him at 2:40 with a hot cup of cocoa. At 2:40, the steward arrived to deliver the captain his beverage, but Second Officer Metcalf turned him away as he still hadn't seen the lighthouse on the port side. By 3 a.m., Metcalf had still not seen the Sambro Island Lighthouse, yet he still refused to wake the captain, despite direct orders given for him to do so. The ship, with its engines at full steam ahead, was now dangerously close to the rocky shores of Halifax. If you've enjoyed this episode so far, give us a like and subscribe to check out all of our other maritime disasters. Quartermaster Robert Thomas was at the helm. He was one of the few crew members who knew of the dangers of entering Halifax. He advised Metcalf of the situation ahead, but Metcalf brushed him off. At 3:15, lookouts at the front of the ship shouted, "Breakers ahead!" This was when Metcalf realized his mistake. He ordered the ship's engines full reverse and to turn the ship, hoping to avoid the rocks. The crew watched on as the ship began to turn, but it was too late. The jagged rocks below the surface made contact with the hull, peeling back the keel and opening up the ship to the frigid waters. The Atlantic continued moving forward before crashing into Golden Rule Rock, which stopped the ship so quickly that all oil lamps across the ship were snuffed out. The Atlantic was now blanketed in darkness. All passengers aboard had been awoken by the collision, with some being thrown from their beds while they slept. The captain rushed to the bridge to see the bow of his precious ship, resting precariously atop a rock not far from shore. The rough seas were not helping the situation, as large waves were now rolling the stern back and forth as it was still in the water. As the stern was moving around, the propeller came into contact with the rocky shore, ripping the blades off and leaving the ship adrift. Water was now rushing into the ship, and in the engine room, the crew was attempting to vent as much steam as they could so that the icy waters didn't cause an explosion when they reached the boilers. On the bridge, Captain Williams issued 3 orders. 1. All hands on deck. 2. Ready and begin lowering the lifeboats. And finally, Quartermaster Royland and Speakman were to begin firing off the distress rockets as fast as possible. Below deck, now in darkness, passengers and steerage were confused on what they should do. Some thought to head for the lifeboat deck, while others were hesitant on leaving their belongings behind. The stairs quickly filled up with panicked people attempting to flee the ship. This created a bottleneck, trapping many people below deck as the water filled the ship. With this chaos below, on deck, officers were trying to fill the lifeboats. As they lowered one into the rough seas, the crew lost control, spilling the passengers, mostly women and children, into the icy waters. After repeated attempts and losses, the captain deemed the lifeboats unsafe. A group of men refused to leave one of the lifeboats, and in the chaos, the boat tumbled into the sea, killing all aboard, including Officer Metcalf, who had been responsible for this disaster. The quartermasters in charge of launching the flares were able to launch 8 in the hopes of getting someone's attention, but as they attempted to light the 9th, the rocket exploded in their faces, burning them severely. After this, the ship rolled, causing the remaining rockets to fall overboard. This was when the rough seas managed to push the ship off the rock it was perched on, causing the ship to roll 30 degrees to port and sending countless people over the side and into the water. Below deck, many women and children screamed for rescue, but as the ship sank lower into the water, the screams were replaced with a haunting silence. Anyone still alive in the center of the ship realized their time was running out, and some managed to climb out the open portholes and up into the ship's rigging. The water continued to rise, forcing survivors on deck towards the bow as well as up into the rigging further up the masts. Captain Williams took charge of the rescue and led some of the remaining crew to the bow of the ship. Here, they attempted to run a rope from the ship to the rock that the ship had collided with in order to evacuate the remaining passengers. Once secured, one by one, men began climbing from the ship to Golden Rule Rock, desperately clinging to the ropes and hoping for rescue. Quartermaster Robert Thomas had been thrown from the ship, but somehow made it to land. Once on land, he began moving up the shoreline to find help. The distress rockets that had launched had been effective, as a family of fishermen on Mars Island had been awoken by the rockets, and Michael Clancy was now on his way to investigate. Seeing the carnage along the shoreline, Michael rushed to get help from other locals and organize a rescue. The Clancy family, as well as other volunteers, used their boats to rescue survivors from Golden Rule Rock, as well as other survivors in the water. Once ashore, the survivors made their way to the Clancy home, where they were able to warm themselves by the fire and were given something to eat. It is estimated that 400 survivors passed through the Clancy household, soaked to the bone, and many suffering from hypothermia. As the sun began to rise, spectators on shore could see that there were still survivors trapped in the rigging of the ship. 3 survivors, First Officer John Firth, a young steward boy, and a woman named Rosa Bateman, were still alive up in the ship's masts. Reverend William Ancient gathered a small crew on a dinghy and set out to rescue the 3 still trapped on the ship. They managed to collect Firth and the young steward, but Rosa had passed away and was so entangled in the mizzenmast that she couldn't be recovered. She was left behind as the others escaped the ship and returned to shore. With no one left aboard the ship, it finally began to break apart and disappear beneath the waves. Of the 952 people aboard, 535 died, including every woman. Only one child survived, a young man named John Hanley, who was cared for after the incident by the Clancy family's daughter, Sarah Jane O'Reilly. Following the sinking, White Star Line and the Canadian government reimbursed those who had participated in the rescue, as well as paying rewards to all who had been brave enough to take to the sea to rescue survivors. This loss was devastating to White Star Line, and the company nearly went bankrupt following the tragedy. Thanks for watching this episode of Never Stop Learning. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, as it really goes far in supporting the channel. Also, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to check out all of our other maritime disaster videos. Until next time.